As is our next guest to give us some primer from the All PHLY Flyers show, Charlie O'Connor. Ciao. Good morning, buddy.
How's it going, Ed?
Good, pal. We're looking for some primer for the off season, right? Sixers, Flyers. We talk about the Wells Fargo Center being dark for a while now, but now it's going to start heating up when it comes to the off season. What do we expect timeline with the Flyers, the NHL draft, what to kind of expect, and any update on Michkov?
Well, everything I've heard implies that the Flyers aren't necessarily expecting to have a super eventful offseason. Now, obviously, they have 2 first-round picks, so the draft is going to be big. And they have the 12th overall pick. It's a spot where they should be able to get someone in that second tier, so a potential impact player. So that's exciting. And they have the what is looking right now to be the final pick in the first round because they have Florida's pick. Florida is up 3-1 in the final. So I guess it's possible it could be number 31. It's probably going to be 32. But beyond the draft, look, I'm not saying the Flyers aren't going to do things. They're certainly poking around on hockey trades. There are players they've made available on their roster that they're listening on, and they're going to have to make some decisions. I wrote an article this morning on allphly.com about Cam Atkinson. They need to make a decision on him, whether they want to keep him for his final year, whether they want to potentially buy him out, which is something that they'll have to decide in the next week and a half, because that buyout window opens up 48 hours after the Cup final ends. So it depends on when the Cup final ends. Or they could look to trade him. Darren Dreger of TSN reported this morning that San Jose had a bit of interest, but Atkinson has a partial no trade clause, and he wasn't too keen on the idea of going to San Jose. So we'll see how this plays out. But there will be decisions made, and there will be moves made. I'm not expecting them to be super active in free agency. If they make a big move, it's probably going to be a trade. And they're going to do, I think, a little bit of roster cleanup. But I wouldn't be necessarily expecting the big offseason to happen this summer.
When you look at guys they'd be interested, to me, it's like guys that you would add would be, you're in the league 3 or 4 years, you have some upside that maybe you could kind of get a kid that would blossom. That to me would be the guys that I would look at, where you could use this year to kind of take flyers on to kind of look at and say, can I get a guy who's 23, 24 years old who might have a bit of upside that can blossom here, that might need a change of scenery?
Yeah, I think the model for that type of move, and obviously the Flyers don't have a Claude Giroux to trade again, but the model for that type of move was Owen Tippett, where you got a guy who, first round pick a few years ago, hadn't quite found his place in the Florida organization. He gets traded in the Giroux trade. The Flyers turn Owen Tippett into a legitimate top 6 winger. Is he a star? Probably not. Maybe he has another level, but at the very least, he's a good player that you unearthed as a buy low. Could you find another guy like that? Maybe. And there are options, but it's worth noting that even buying low on Owen Tippett required you to trade away your longtime captain and still very good hockey player in Claude Giroux. The Flyers don't have a lot of pieces like that to trade away. The trades that are more interesting for me aren't necessarily reclamation projects. Those are there. Those are out there, and maybe you can unearth one of those guys. But it's the idea of doing a hockey trade to fill a need. And in my mind, the biggest need the Flyers have long-term, because I'm not really looking at short-term. It would be nice if the Flyers make the playoffs next year, and I'm sure that's what the team is hoping for. But their goal is to build a team in 3-4 years.
Right, exactly.
That's the goal. So I'm mostly looking at it as, what are their long-term needs? And to me, their biggest long-term need is top 6 center, particularly a first-line center. Because Michkov, as great as I think he's going to be, he's a winger. You want to have somebody
that can be that playmaker. Anything in the draft? Like, is there any movement, any prospects? It's a shame because that, at that spot, it looks like you're not going to get that impact player as you would at the top.
There's some guys. I think the 2 guys that fans have probably zeroed in the most, and again, going back to my point about how they need a center solution, a long-term center solution, the 2 guys I think that are most interesting are Berkeley Catton and Constantinius. Now, Berkeley Catton is the more exciting, flashy option. He's a great skater. He's super skilled. He attacks off the rush. He racked up 110 points in juniors this year. And he has, in theory, if everything works well, first line center upside. However, he's small. There's a chance he might have to move over to wing at the NHL level. There are obviously going to be concerns about how a guy like that will perform in the playoffs, given the fact that the game changes in the playoffs. And if you have Catton and Mitchkov as your top two players, is that too small up front? I personally would take the risk, but I understand the concerns. Then you have Consta Helenius, who also isn't huge, but he's a little bit safer. He's more of a hockey IQ, intelligence type of guy where it's much easier to envision him sticking down the middle. He just might not have the scoring upside that a Catton has, but he also might not bring the risk that a Catton has. So if you're looking to fill the center spot in this draft with a guy who could potentially be Mitchkov's long-term center 3-4 years down the line, those are the two guys that are most interesting to me. And then it just comes down to, are either of them going to be available? I think both of them have a chance to be there. It's not a guarantee. And then if one or both of them is available, do you think that they fit what you're trying to build? With Catton, is he worth the risk of him not being a center? With Helenius, are you okay if he turns out to just be a really good second-line center rather than a first-line center? So there's no slam dunk choices, but there are legitimately interesting options that I think have a good chance of being available at 12.
Yeah, I talked to Jonesy a little bit, and one of the things I think he believes is, I know we all want a top six, we want top six players because they need it, but he believes in building a blue line. And he was like, listen, you can say whatever you want, but Florida has a great blue line, and that's one of the differences. So I do think that they'll really look to that blue line too, just judging from just reading between the lines with Jonesy and how he values defense.
Yeah, the guy who stands out to me the most, and again, he might even be there at 12 because there are a lot of things about his game that scouts and teams really like. But the guy that I feel like we've talked about the most on our show is Carter Yakimchuk. And reason being is that his upside is through the roof. He's got really good puck skills.
He's the guy I want. He's the guy that I looked at and I think I would want.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with him, and this is no pun intended, he's big. And I mean, you and I both know, talking to Jonesy values size on the back end. His view, and I think this is correct, is that having size on the back end, especially in the playoffs, is really important. Yakimchuk's a big guy. He's 6'3". He's built. He's only going to get stronger as he grows. And he also isn't afraid to play physical. He's a mean defenseman. And I do think that the blue line they're building right now, the guys who look like they're going to be part of this in the long term, Cam York, Jamie Drysdale, even Travis Sanheim. He's a little bit on the older side, but he's locked up for so many years. Then they got some prospects like Emil Andre. These are not, Sanheim is big, but he's not physical. York, Drysdale, Andre, they're not big or particularly physical. Andre's probably the only one who is. I think ideally the Flyers would love to bring in a defenseman who adds that big physicality. And the cool thing about Yakimchuk is he would bring that physicality and that size without lacking skill. He can make plays. He can score goals. So he's not just a one-dimensional physical defensive defenseman. He's a physical defenseman who also can score you 50, 60 points in a season in his best years. So he's very intriguing to me. Now, there's risk there. He's not a perfect player. He's raw in a lot of areas. His skating, while his straight line skating is good, his quick twitch, his acceleration isn't great. There are some questions about his hockey IQ. But the ceiling is through the roof, and he certainly fits the archetype on defense that I think Jonesy and the guys in the Flyers front office tend to like.
Yep. Listen, I'm with you, Charles. So timeline, say the finals ends tonight. What's the timeline for the fans to kind of look at some of this stuff that's going to happen?
Sure. So I think the big thing that would start if the finals end tonight, it takes 48 hours from the end of the final for the buyout window to open up. And Cam Atkinson is very much a candidate potentially to be bought out. I gather the Flyers are exploring a lot of different options, but he could be bought out. And that buyout window would start as soon as Thursday night, and it lasts until June 30th. So that's the first thing that happens that the Flyers are going to have to start making decisions on. Then obviously you have the draft. The draft is the 28th and the 29th, so Friday and Saturday and next week. And then July 1st, you have the first day of free agency. Now, I'm not expecting the Flyers to be super active in free agency, but the thing is that these are events that tend to spur action. A lot of trades happen at the draft. A lot of trades happen on day one of free agency because teams are trying to open up cap space to get their guy. So generally speaking, things start getting busy once the final gets done because the NHL makes it pretty clear to teams that, like, we don't want you making big trades during the final because we don't want you taking attention away from the final. Once the final's done, then things might start happening, but things will really start getting going, I think, probably early to mid next week as teams start getting ready for the draft and start really zeroing in on the guys they want and the guys they want to get rid of.
That's great. Chow, great stuff, buddy. What time's the show today?
Show is at 1 p.m. today.
Here it is, 1 o'clock. All PHLY Flyers show. Charlie O'Connor, Bill Matz. The guys do a great job. Thanks, buddy.
You got it. Thanks, Anthony.
We all silly like the mayor.